Hi, this presentation is on country specific local clinical data requirements for registration of new drug. Requirements in Australia, TGA or Therapeutic Goods Administration is regulatory body in Australia. Clinical phase 1, 2 and 3 studies are required for registration of new drug in Australia. And if there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US or Europe may be used for registration in Australia. However, local clinical data in Australian patients is required. There are case studies on approval based on Australian patients' participation in phase 2 and or phase 3 studies. One should enroll adequate number of subjects in Australia in global phase 2 and or phase 3 program. Below given is an example of approval of ipilimumab for treatment of metastatic melanoma. The below mentioned clinical data was submitted for approval. Phase 3 studies data. There was one main study which was conducted in Europe, North America, South America and Africa. Plus there were 3 supportive phase 3 studies. All 3 studies with Australia as one of the study sites. Phase 2 studies data. There were 2 main studies. One study included Australia as one of the study site, and there were 14 supportive phase 2 clinical studies which were done in EU, North America, South America. Phase 1 clinical studies data. There were 3 main studies all done in USA plus 8 supportive phase 1 studies, including 4 phase 1/2 studies which were done outside Australia, mainly in USA. One should always consult the regulatory agency before making the decision on conducting clinical trial or clinical data requirements. 14 months is the median approval time for new active substance in Australia, and approval is granted for unlimited period. Requirements in Brazil. Anvisa or Brazilian Health Surveillance Agency is the regulatory agency in Brazil. Clinical phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3 studies are required for approval. Data from phase 3 studies are considered mandatory for registration of new biological product. Clinical studies may be conducted locally within or outside Brazil, but site must be approved by Anvisa and by local Ministry of Health in country where study is conducted. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US or Europe may be used for registration in Brazil. However, one should include Brazilian clinical site in global phase 3 studies to provide safety and efficacy data in Brazilian subjects. Local, local phase 1 study may not be required, may not be necessary in Brazil. 15 months is the median approval time for new active substance in Brazil, and registration validity is for 5 years, after which renewal is required. Requirements in Mexico. Mexican Health Agency or COFEPRIS is the regulatory agency in Mexico. Clinical phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3 studies are required. The biological regulation makes specific references for need of local clinical trial data. Local clinical efficacy, safety and quality data are necessary for all biological products that are developed in Mexico. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US and Europe may be used for registration in Mexico. Local phase 1 study may not be necessary. However, enrolling adequate number of subjects in Mexico in global phase 3 program is required. 13 months is the median approval time for new active substance approval. 5 is the registration validity, after which renewal is required. Requirements in Russia. Ministry of Health of Russian Federation is the regulatory agency. Clinical phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies are required. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US or Europe may be used for registration in Russia. Local phase 1 study may not be necessary. However, one should enroll adequate number of subjects in Russia in global phase 3 studies. 19 months is the median approval time for new active substance, and 5 years is the registration validity, after which renewal is required. Requirements in South Korea. Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, or MFDS, is the regulatory body in South Korea. Clinical phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies are required. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US or Europe may be used for registration in South Korea. However, local clinical data in South Korean subjects is required. One should enroll adequate number of subjects in South Korea in global phase 3 program for proving safety and efficacy in South Korean subjects. Local phase 1 study may not be required. One should always consult the regulatory agency or MFDA before making a decision. 12 months is the median approval time for new active substance, and registration validity is for 5 years, after which renewal is required. Requirements in China. China FDA is the regulatory agency. Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies are required. Local clinical trials are required to be conducted in China for biologicals to support new drug application. Supplement data from studies done in Asian subjects outside China can also be considered, but this does not waive the need to do studies in China. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US and Europe may be used for registration in China. However, local single and multiple dose phase 1 studies are required for a biological application. A single dose PK study to capture full PK profile is required as per local technical guidance, but this can be waived if repeated dosing is medically necessary in patients population under study. China also requires a phase 2 and or phase 3 study to be conducted in Chinese subjects. It may be possible to collect population PK data in phase 3 studies in lieu of a phase 1 multiple dose PK study, but this has to be agreed with the China FDA. 20 months is the median approval time for new active substance. 5 years the registration validity, after which renewal is required. Now, requirements in Argentina. NMET, or National Drug Regulatory Agency, is the agency for regulation of registration in Argentina. Clinical phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies are required. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US or Europe may be used for registration in Argentina. However, local clinical trial data is required for approval of new drug. Local phase 1 study may be required. One should enroll adequate number of subjects in Argentina in global phase 2 and or phase 3 program to provide safety and efficacy data in Argentina subjects. 10 to 12 months is the approval time. If the drug product is already registered in Argentina, the similar drug product is already registered in Argentina, or if the product already approved in one of these mentioned countries like US, Japan, Israel, Canada, UK, Australia, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, France, Italy, Spain, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands. If the product is not registered in any of these mentioned countries like US and Europe, Japan, Canada, and Israel, or if the similar product is not already registered in Argentina, then median approval time is 3 years. 5 years is the registration validity, after which renewal is required. requirements in Turkey. Turkish Medicine and Medical Device Agency is the regulatory body in Turkey. Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3 clinical studies are required. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US or Europe may be used for registration in Turkey. Local study data may not be required. However, one should enroll adequate number of local subjects in global phase 2 and or phase 3 program for generating safety and efficacy data in Turkey subjects. 31 months is the median approval time for new active substance. 5 years is the registration validity, after which renewal is required. Now, requirements in Colombia. NVIMA or National Institute of Food and Drug Monitoring is regulatory agency in Colombia. Clinical phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies are required. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US or Europe may be used for registration in Colombia. Local clinical data may not be required. However, one should enroll adequate number of local subjects in global phase 2 and or phase 3 program for generating safety and efficacy data in Colombia subjects. 11 months is the median approval time for new active substance. 5 years the registration validity, after which renewal is required. Requirements in Taiwan. Taiwan FDA is regulatory agency. Clinical phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies are required. If there is a global development program, then studies done to support registration in US or Europe may be used for registration in Taiwan. However, local clinical data in Taiwan subjects is required. Local phase 1 study may not be required. One should enroll adequate number of subjects in Taiwan in global phase 3 program for providing safety and efficacy data in Taiwanese subjects. 16 months is the median approval time for new active substance. 5 years is the registration validity, after which renewal is required. Now coming to local clinical data requirements, some key insights. The following properties would make it more likely to require some bridging clinical data in local population. If the product is having long non-linear PK, then agency will ask for the local clinical data. If there is steep dose response curve or steep safety and efficacy curve, then also agency will ask for the local clinical data. If product is having narrow therapeutic index, then also agency will ask for local clinical data. If there is a higher inter-subject variation in viability, then also local studies may be asked by the regulatory agency. Evaluation of immune responses to therapeutic proteins and its effect on PK and or PD is also important to be evaluated in phase 1 studies in case of biological products. Biological products, some specific regulatory considerations. Biological products are different from chemical products. If there is a change in manufacturing process or equipment or facility used in manufacturing, that could result in changes in biological molecule that might not be detected by standard chemical or molecular biology characterization techniques, yet it could alter the safety or efficacy profile. Before, changes in manufacturing process, equipment, or facility may require additional clinical studies to demonstrate the product's continued safety, identity, purity, and potency. Since there is a significant difference in how biological products are manufactured compared to small chemical molecule, the production is monitored by regulatory agency from early stages to make sure that final product turns out as expected. A sponsor or company may be able to demonstrate product comparability through analytical or and functional comparability testing without additional clinical data between a biological product made after manufacturing change and a product made before manufacturing change. The agency may determine that the two products are comparable if results of comparability testing demonstrate that manufacturing changes do not affect the safety, identity, purity, or potency. Implications during biological development. If there is a change in manufacturing process, facility, or equipment, then implications on regulatory process may be additional data may be required. If there is a manufacturing process change for biological product during development process, during analytical, preclinical, or clinical testing, then additional comparative data will be required, which may be analytical data, functional testing data, and clinical data, depending on impact of manufacturing change on product characteristics. So additional comparative data will be required with comparing the product before manufacturing change and product after manufacturing change. That's all in this presentation. Thank you very much.